To do constellation drawing, you don't need a telescope at all. So I'm going to teach you how to draw some constellations today. And when we've done a quick drawing of a constellation, I'm then going to show you step by step how to make this Milky Way model that you can then stand on a shelf somewhere. And I think these are super easy to make just out of a couple of pieces of cardboard and some cotton wool. So hopefully you've all got your materials ready. I'm going to do it step by step, but if you need to watch the recording back afterwards, then that's absolutely fine to do so. So I'm just going to switch cameras so that we can draw together, because I'm going to be making everything together with me. So you won't see me anymore, but you'll see my hands. Now, obviously, to draw constellations, it needs to be nighttime, and currently it is broad daylight, so I can't show you any constellations live. But what I can do is show you basically a picture in this atlas that has got a really nice kind of, it shows the different brightnesses of the stars within the constellation of Orion. And Orion is one of the most easy to spot and the brightest in the winter sky. It's kind of more or less south at the moment when it goes dark. It's got some really beautiful bright stars in it, and it's got some stars that are also a little bit faint. At an atlas like this, you can see the stars are different sizes, and that is representing how bright those stars are on a particular magnitude scale. And you can clearly see this when you look with the naked eye. So just looking at a star map and trying to find the patterns in the sky can be a bit difficult. But like with all astronomy objects, once you've drawn it, it will really help you to remember the shapes and where the stars are relative to each other. So this is the sketch that we're going to do. I've already done one to show you what we're doing. So all you need is a piece of plain white paper and absolutely any pencil that you happen to have. So the first thing you need to do is look at the size of your page and then try to scale this up. So obviously I've got a big A4 page here, but in order for you to see the star map and all of that, if I fill the page, you're not going to be able to see what I'm drawing. But if you are doing this yourself, looking at the sky, try to draw things as big as you can, because the bigger you do it, the easier it actually is. So the first thing I'm going to do is just kind of have a look at the shape of Orion. And it sort of looks like an old-fashioned egg timer, if any of you have seen one of those. But if you ignore the middle bit, it's kind of like a slightly wonky long rectangle. So it's quite handy to put those outside stars on first, because that gives you a bit of a map to work to get the rest of them in. You can start with the belt stars as well if you want to, but you have to make sure you leave enough room on the page, because you could get your scales a bit wrong and then you're not going to be able to fit everything on the page. So what I'm going to do first of all, I'm going to draw it a little bit bigger than it is in the atlas, just so that you can see it better. But I'm going to start with those corner stars. So we'll start off up here with Betelgeuse or Betelgeuse, depending on your pronunciation of it. That is actually one of the biggest stars in Orion. It is actually the biggest star in Orion. Down just off the bottom of the atlas here, we've got another star that's brighter. So I'm going to do that one a decent size, so you can see a nice blob there. If you do a little blob and then just go bigger and bigger and bigger with your pencil, it will stay round, or you can draw a big circle and then color it in. Either way is absolutely fine. I'm using a B pencil because it's a bit darker and it shows up on camera, but you honestly can use any pencil whatsoever for this, because there's no complex blending or anything like that with a constellation drawing. So from there, I'm going to come down and just try and get my sort of relative distance down the side here. So I've got two stars to do these first two corners. If we look at this and draw a straight line down from Betelgeuse, you can see that this little star here is slightly off center. So it's going to be in a tiny little bit from where that one was. So come down straight, then just go in a little bit. And this star is not quite as big as Betelgeuse. So remember, it's easier to make it bigger than it is to rub it out and make it smaller. So start off small, and if you need to make it bigger, you can do. So going across the bottom, if we look here, I'll just show you a bit closer, you can see that the next star, Rigel, again, is slightly uphill a bit from horizontal. So this is the way that I map things out in my brain when I'm looking at constellations. It's all, where are these stars relative to each other? So I'm going to go across and bring it up a little bit. But in terms of distance, it's probably just under half the distance that we've got here. If you get this wrong the first couple of times, it honestly doesn't matter. It will help you remember the constellation, and that's the important thing. The whole point of doing this is to help you learn the object that you're drawing, and it will honestly help you just to remember the patterns of the stars, because this star map has lines drawn on it. The sky does not have lines drawn on it, so memorizing these patterns is really useful for trying to identify constellations. Now if we come up again on this side, we can see that this other star is definitely quite a long way in from the straight line, and it's also a bit below Betelgeuse. So we're going to come probably down about that far from Betelgeuse, bring it out just in a little bit, so I reckon about there, and then that is also a fairly big star, probably similar in size to the other corner. So just put that one in. So now we've kind of got a wonky rectangle. So the rest of it is just kind of filling in the gaps. So the first thing I'm going to do is this pointy bit up here. This is the bit that makes it look like a cookie jar that I have at home. It's got that nice kind of pointed lid and a tall, thin structure. You guys don't have that cookie jar, so it won't look like that to you. But think about what this reminds you of, because that's another way of remembering the shapes. So you can see that this little cluster of stars here is coming up in a point. It's not quite in the middle, it's more off to the right hand side, so it's nearer to this star on the right than it is to Betelgeuse. So I'm just going to put the first one in there. That's a smaller one, and then above that there's a slightly larger one. Some of these stars, if you're doing it naked eye, you're not going to see. A star map is showing you some very faint stars that you may not be able to see from your location. So there are 3 fairly big stars, and then there's a couple of really tiny ones, which I'm going to put on, even though you probably won't see those if you're doing this naked eye. So the next thing I want to do is do Orion's belt, because that's one of the most distinctive patterns of stars within Orion, and it's what helps people identify it, that lovely row of 3 stars. Now you can see if I put my pencil across, the belt stars are going up at an angle, and they're also kind of cinched in the middle. So it's kind of like if Orion has a belt with a sword hanging off it, that's where the mythology comes from. The first star on the left is slightly more than halfway down and comes in, if you look coming down straight, it comes in quite a bit as well. So we put that one in probably about here. Do you know, I don't think I've ever done a sketch that is perfect if you overlay it with a star map. So if you think that you've got one of these in slightly the wrong position, it doesn't matter. It's just about practicing doing this so that you can do it when you're out looking with your own eyes. And next time you do it, it'll be better. So we've got 3 stars that are almost equally spaced apart. So I'm going to put the middle one in. And then the last one is just up a tiny little bit. So it's these just little subtle differences that you're going to be looking for when you're drawing constellations, because these are the patterns that you are going to remember when you next start to draw them. So we need to put his sword on because he is a mighty hunter, so he needs to have his sword for hunting. And that is where the Great Orion Nebula is. So when you look at this with the naked eye in a very dark sky, you will see that it looks like 3 stars, but one of those stars is actually a huge nebula. It sort of comes down more or less in line with the middle belt star, but it doesn't come all the way to the bottom. I'm going to put the bottom one on first, which is there. And then the other, that's a smaller one, and then a slightly bigger one again there. If you had binoculars and looked at this region, you would very clearly see it's like the shape of wings coming out here, which is the huge nebula that you can see even with fairly small binoculars. And sometimes with the naked eye, you can just see a bit of a glow around there that tells you that's not actually a star, it's actually a huge nebula. So that you could leave it there. That's the bit of Orion that most people recognize, but this constellation extends out a little bit more. We've got a mighty warrior and a sword. We need him to have some arms. So I'm going going to look up here. This one's kind of waving a club in the air. I'm waving my arm, but you can't see me. So I'll point down here. So you can see that this is an arm upwards. Some of the mythology drawings have him holding a big club. So I'm going to come up there. It's a smaller star, just out at a bit of an angle, and put that there, and then it forks out to two stars that are about the same distance up, but just spread apart a little bit. So it makes this very thin isosceles triangle. An isosceles triangle is one that has two sides that are exactly the same length, and that's what that bit looks like. The other thing that you might see on Orion is his shield. Sometimes it's an animal that he's caught and he's carrying the skin on his arm. Sometimes this is his big shield, because he's obviously got a shield and a sword when he goes off doing all his warrioring. So this kind of comes out, and this is a part of Orion that people often forget to look for, and it's actually quite easy to see, and it's a really lovely shape, and it comes out quite a long way. So I just left enough room on my page there. So I'm going to, the first star is just a tiny bit below. So I'm going to come out just a little bit below. So my first dot was slightly in the wrong place. Not a huge star, that one, but the one just above that is bigger. So hopefully, yeah, I'm still in shot. Trying to get this in on the camera view is quite tricky. But so that one's a little bit bigger. Then we come round again a little bit, and there's a dot there, and then it sort of curves round. And if you look, this top star is almost in line with the bit that we did at the top here. So if ever you do one star that you think is not quite in the right place, just always check where the star is that you're drawing relative to the rest of the constellation, and it'll help you just get things back in place. And if one of them's slightly out of alignment like that, this is pencil, you can rub it out. It's no problem. So his shield comes down a bit further. If you actually look at the bottom two stars here, they sort of almost form a diagonal line with his belt, but they're a bit lower. So those bottom two kind of come probably quite far down here. Not in quite as much as that, but I think probably there. That's actually a double star as well on the map. There's a big one with a really small one next to it. Again, you're not going to see that naked eye. And then you've got the bottom of it. So if you want to draw the constellation lines on it, you totally can, but I think it's really good to just learn the patterns without the lines, because there are no lines on the sky. One thing that's really good to do as well is to use the free planetarium software called Stellarium, and you can use it on a phone, a tablet, or a laptop, and it will show you where the constellations are at any time during the night. So you can fire it up and it will show you where the constellation is at that exact moment. And if you're struggling to find them, you can tick the button that says add constellation lines. And it's really useful for just kind of getting to know the shapes. But when you go out to look at the sky, there will be no lines on it. So you're going to have to get used to learning the shapes like this. So this is a great one to go out and do yourself when it's you next get a clear night, and just practice getting those in the position. And once you've done Orion, have a look for some of the other brighter constellations and see how you get on with that. So I'll leave the constellation drawing for now. At the end, if anyone has questions about that, I'll obviously be here to answer them. But I'm going to get the stuff together now to make the Milky Way model, because I don't want to run out of time and not finish that. So what I've got here, I'm going to bring my camera up a bit higher so you can see more of my desk. I've got my two pieces of black card, and I've got a map of the Milky Way that I printed out off the internet, which is going to give me a kind of anatomically correct Milky Way. So when I make astronomy models, although obviously a galaxy is not made from cardboard and cotton wool, I like to get everything as accurate as I possibly can to the thing that I'm modeling, because I think that helps you to learn. So this map shows the placement of the spiral arms on the Milky Way galaxy, which is our galaxy, and the sun is out on one of the little spurs here. So I'm going to first of all take my plastic bowl. I use plastic, so if I drop it, it doesn't break. we're going to make this top bit of the model first by drawing around my plastic bowl and cutting it out, and then we'll mark out the shape of the spiral arms. So I'm going to move the other piece of paper just out of the way for a second. We'll come back to that when we make the base. So I'm using a pastel pencil, but if you haven't got that, you can use any pencil. It can just be hard to see on black paper when you draw with a grey pencil. So I'm going to just draw around my bowl first and then cut that out, because it's easier to cut it out before you stick anything onto it. So I've got big scissors. If you don't do a good job of cutting a circle, it really doesn't matter, because the interesting bit is going to be where we put all of the spiral arms, because that's the bit that's going to be correct. So not having a perfect circle around the edge of our model is really nothing to worry about. I've got an actual circle cutter and I've still never cut a circle accurately. So it really doesn't matter if you're trying to do this by hand. So once we've got the circle, we then can put it alongside the map, and I'm going to use my chalk pencil again. It doesn't matter if you haven't got that, just as long as you can see where you're putting the markings, that's fine. I'm using a chalk pencil because it's going to show up better on camera. So first of all, the core of the galaxy is pretty big, so I'm going to keep it at that angle because I like that jaunty angle. So find the middle first of all. So just put a little dot there. We're going to stick cotton wool on top of this, so it doesn't matter if it isn't very neat. Then there's this big sort of oval eye-shaped structure, which I'm going to draw on next, just with my pastel pencil, not pressing on very hard, but we're going to glue over this, as I said. So you're not going to see the scribbles once we glue the stuff on top. So we've got the core there, twist that back round so it's pointing the same way. And then we need to look at these spiral arms, and it might look a bit daunting trying to draw these, but it's going to be easier on camera for you than it is for me, because I can see all of the tiny little bits here that are really very, very complex. But I'm going to start with this arm called the Sagittarius arm, and it comes from this top corner, and bring it out. Make sure you leave room, because there's another smaller arm that is actually, this is the Perseus arm. I think that's the Sagittarius arm, but there is another smaller arm that needs to go in this gap. So don't make it too close to the middle bit. And then bring that round. Now, these are not solid. These are basically huge clusters of stars that are kind of, because of the way that gravity has caused them to form, they're in this sort of spiral structure. And a lot of the arms are disconnected. They're not a solid line. And this is quite a stylized map of the Milky Way. But if you look at any galaxy photo, you'll see that they are not solid arms. There's loads of dust, which we're going to put on separately in a minute. I've got a great technique for doing that. But we're bringing out the Scutum Centaurus arm here, which comes right the way out to the edge. This is huge. This comes all the way out. To give you some context, the diameter of this in real life is 100,000 light years. So these arms are huge. They're absolutely huge. So I think that's amazing when you just think about how big this is when we draw it. So I'm going to put some of these little bits in because I want to make sure I don't forget to glue over them. So there's another really faint bit that sort of comes out, and this is very disconnected arm. It's kind of just in little bits, gravitationally probably been torn apart. And you'll notice there are different colors within parts of these arms as well, which we're going to add on later. So I'm just putting just disconnected dotted lines here because this is not a solid arm, and when I glue the cotton wool on, I want to make sure I don't put too much down. So in the gap here where one of the arms where our sun is, we're going to put in this little Sagittarius arm first, which is very faint. Bring that round, and then it sort of splits off into two. So there's one that comes out in pieces like this and actually keeps going right the way out to the edge like that. And then there's this other one that has the sun on it, and we're going to put the sun on this model a little bit later on. So that kind of comes out, makes a little fork, and then we'll put the sun on there in a little while. So I'm going to keep the model, the map of the galaxy there just as reference, because the minute I turn this round, I'll forget which way up I am because I cannot read a map. So I'm just going to grab my cotton wool ball. Sorry, I've left that over here. So I'm using a cotton wool ball, which I am going to unroll because we want a really, really thin piece of cotton wool. So this is a cotton wool ball. Unroll it like this. So you've got this flat piece of cotton wool, and then just tease out some really, really small pieces. And those really small pieces are so good for gluing down on these spiral arms. You're going to get bits everywhere. You're going to get fluffy fingers doing this, but it's so much fun. I really love doing this. The other thing I do when I glue it down is sort of tease it outwards as well. So we've got those bits that we're going to use for the arms. I'm going to take a slightly bigger bit first of all and just break that off and just get the core down. If you wanted to, you could put a little black pom-pom in the middle here to represent the black hole at the center of the galaxy, but I don't actually have any black pom-poms, so I'm not going to do that. I'm using a quick dry washable PVA glue, and you don't need a lot of glue. If you put too much glue on, it'll make it all go wrinkly. So I'm just I've got a nice nozzle on my glue bottle, but if you don't have that, you can use a cocktail stick or a glue spreader and just kind of put a little few dabs of glue there in the middle, and then we're going to get the core glued down. So the first thing I do is just plonk that in the middle, and then pushing down with one finger, I'm sort of gently teasing it out so it comes out to a point. And we can use all of these little scraps in a minute on other bits of the model. And then again, just sort of pulling that out so that we've got a sort of vague eye shape. And as you can see, the second you've got glue on your fingers, you end up with furry fingers, but that's fine. You're going to get a lot more fur on your fingers before this model's finished. So it'll keep your fingers nice and warm if you go out in the cold later. So that's the kind of core bit done. So again, I'm going to get my glue and I'm going to just kind of mark out, do the arms one at a time, because otherwise you're going to get in a horrific mess. Just a tiny bit of glue. You really don't want much because the cotton wool will stick quite well. Follow that line out. You can see I'm not putting a solid line of glue here because as you tease this out, you don't want it to be solid because this is just clusters of stars. It's not actually a solid object. So I'm going to take one of these thin pieces that I pulled out earlier and start to glue that down as well. And as I press down on here, I'm just very carefully teasing it out so it's nice and thin. We don't want it too chunky, but if it is chunky, that's okay as well. You can always pull bits off afterwards when it's dry if you think you've got too much cotton wool down. If you tease it too much, just overlap it, tease it out again. It's really easy to do this. And then just keep going. I find it easier to rotate the model as you go around rather than try to rotate your hands and your arms. So I've got a tiny little bit for the end there, and that's enough. We can just kind of push that down. And if you get a few bits hanging off, that's absolutely fine because, as I say, we're trying to represent clusters of stars here on these dusty spiral arms. We're going to put the dust on separately in a minute once we've got it glued onto the base. So we've got one spiral arm on there. I'm going to do exactly the same thing on this one. Just glue that all the way around, just a really, really small amount of glue. If you haven't got the supplies here and you're going to get some stuff to follow this at a later time, this quick dry tacky glue is amazing for this sort of work. So I use it all the time for this kind of thing. So you can see I'm just pulling apart some of this wool and I'm going to glue that down there. And then like I did before, just rotating it, pulling the cotton wool out really gently, pushing it down. You've got to multitask. You've got to tease it out, push it down and pull it out and glue it to your fingers all in one go. But I think if you don't get messy making a model, you've not had a good time. So just embrace the fluffy fingers for now. So you can see that that tiny piece of cotton wool has managed to stretch out enough to do this entire arm. I probably use a third of a whole cotton ball when I make a model this size. So now we've got our two really big arms on. The rest of them are slightly smaller and more disjointed. So all of these weird little bits of fluff that you've got, you can now put to use when you're gluing those bits on, if you can get them off your fingers. So I'm going to do this arm here. It's quite a broken arm, so I'm kind of putting dots, trying to make sure that I represent the texture that this map is showing me, with all of those just random pieces that are following the gravitational pattern but are not actually solid. So I'm going to get some of these really thin pieces, glue them down, stretch it out and glue it down again with the next piece. And as you go around, you will end up with these little disconnected chunks of fluff, which is exactly what we're going for. So I bet you've never heard a galaxy described as having disconnected chunks of fluff on it before, but this is just the best way of representing the texture that you see on photographs of other galaxies. Obviously, we don't have an actual photograph of our galaxy because we live inside it, and it's impossible to go outside of our galaxy at the moment. We don't have the technology to send a spacecraft out there, so everything we know about the Milky Way galaxy comes from us studying it from the inside. And luckily we have telescopes that can see through the gas and dust, so we're pretty confident we know the structure of it. But you know, there may be some things we don't know about our home galaxy because we just literally can't see it from the inside. So if you've got all these little bits sticking up, that's good. That just adds to the idea of these kind of random chunks of star clusters. There's just this last little one to do here, and then we'll leave that a second and get on and do the base. And then once this is glued to the base, we can go in and add the dust. I'll show you the technique that I use for making things look dusty using pastels. I use it all the time in my astronomy sketching work, and it's a really great technique. So we've just got one more set of arms here. We've got that little bit of an arm here, and then it comes out and forks off into the branch where the sun is. And we will be gluing a pom-pom on this model so you can show people where the sun is if you display this model on your shelf at home. I have several of these that I've made now. I make a lot of models for articles in Sky at Night magazine, so my house is full of random homemade models, and I think it's great. It's such a good talking point when people come to visit. The cats think they're great too. They like to kick them on the floor, but that's an entirely different conversation. So there's just this last little arm to come out here, and I'm using these really thin pieces. These are barely there, it's just really thin bits of fluff. So that's all the fluff gluing done. So it looks quite dusty already, so don't pull out all of those random chunks because I think they look quite good. So I'm going to try to get some of that fluff off my fingers and then put that to the side a second and bring this camera up, and then I'm going to show you how I go about making the base. So the base of this is basically a cone with the top chopped off, and then we glue that to the back of the disc, and then you can stand it up, which is really awesome to make just out of a piece of cardboard. So the way that I do this is to take a full A4 sheet of paper, just fold the top bit in half. You don't want to actually fold the page, but just this top bit, you want to mark where the halfway point is. And what we're going to do then is kind of curl this around and stick it down and then roll it up. The best way to get this to stick when you're in a hurry is to use double-sided tape, because glue will work, but glue takes too long to dry. So what we're going to do is get some double-sided tape. This is just the stuff that comes from the works. I like the bigger, fatter double-sided tape for this because it's a bit stronger. So I'm going to put, this is on the back edge because we're going to roll this in, put an L-shaped load of tape there. So that's on that back edge. And then when we take the backing off that and roll this in, it's going to stick our cone down in place. We'll have to trim it down so that it's got the top and the bottom right, but this is a really awesome way of making a base out of very low cost materials. So pull off the backing. If you've got nails, The other reason I like this tape is because the back is easy to get off. The thinner stuff in craft shops, I honestly spend longer getting the back to come off this double-sided tape than I do making the model. So remember, we've got our halfway fold there, and I'm just curling this round and push that down, and then get your hand inside and start to roll it up. So we've got that half stuck down. So we need to put some tape on this half so that when we carry on rolling, this flap will stick to it as well. So again, double-sided tape that's got a back that's easy to get off. I'm going to put a strip down there. I like to do all of the sides here because we are going to cut bits off, and if it's not all stuck, you may get some bits that unravel. So I'm just going to put a wonky piece there, which we're going to trim off anyway, but just for security. This tape is really good. You get 3 for £1, I think, in the works, and it's very, very strong. But if you get a bit that doesn't have any tape and you snip a sticky bit off, then you might have your base unrolling. So it's better to put too much tape on than not enough. So you just need to catch the edge. So having said this is easy to get the back off, I now can't get this one off. Oh, it's coming. Even with nails, it can be a little bit tricky. So there we go. You can sometimes use like a little pointed to like a pin or a needle to just get the edge to come up. I don't normally need to with this particular tape, so that's why I chose it for this project. So turn that round, get the backing off that one, and then we can carry on rolling up our cone. If you pick it up and you've got the tape as well, just push it down with your nail and then peel it off again. So the way that I like to finish the cone is to basically put my hand inside it and just roll it up. And keep rolling until you've got all of those sides attached. And what we've got is the beginnings of a massive Halloween witch's hat. But we're now going to chop this down so that, first of all, we're going to need to cut it so that when we stand it up, it's going to be straight. So I'm going to do that first. And I'm just going to use my big scissors and just eyeball it. I don't do any mathematical stuff here. I just get the scissors and just keep rotating, keep the scissors in one place. So that's almost straight. You can fiddle about and get it absolutely spot on if you want to, but as long as it stands up on its base, that's fine. So that cone will now stand up. Doesn't look like a cone from that camera angle, but that's where it will stand. So now you have to make a decision whether you want your galaxy to be pointing upwards when we put the disc on, or whether you want it at a slight angle. And I think for smaller models, a little angle looks really nice. So that's what I've done with the other one. So you just basically squish the cone. I'm going to probably cut it about here at, I reckon, a 45-degree angle. So chop the top off so you've got a spare bit of cone if you need it for another project. So we now have a base that we can put this onto, but we're going to have to snip some little flaps so that we can attach the disc onto it. So I'm going to use some slightly smaller scissors, and I'm going to snip about the same distance down in all the way around, just probably about a centimetre or so, straight lines down all the way around. Then when we fold these out, we can put some glue on them or double-sided tape, and then we'll be able to attach the disc. So if you keep your snips roughly the same size, when you fold the flaps out, they'll all be the same sort of size, so they'll stick a lot more easily. So fold them out first, and then just put a little bit of double-sided tape on all of those. That one needs to be a bit longer. I can see that one's not quite snipped enough. If you cut it too far, you just fold the flap a bit shorter. You don't have to go all the way to the bottom. So fold this down. So now you've got what looks like a very strange tree, but those surfaces are now going to stick onto here. So we've got that nice and secure. And again, this double-sided tape is just the fastest way to do it, and it's actually really strong. It's a fiddle because you've got to get the back off all these little pieces of tape. Unfortunately, you can't get inside the cone and put these on before snipping them. So it means you've got to peel off all of these backing pieces, but it's way faster than sitting there for half an hour while your PVA glue dries, which is what would happen if we didn't use double-sided tape. It's very tedious. You think, oh, I'll just hold it. And I've done that. And oh boy, it takes so long. So life is too short to sit holding things waiting for glue to dry. So, you know, doesn't matter if these overlap a little bit because nothing's going to touch them. As long as the sticky side is up on these flaps, then we'll be able to attach the disc. So the painstaking process of just pulling off all of those backings, which is very, very boring. So I have a love-hate relationship with double-sided tape, but it does work extremely well. I think this nail seems to be the one that gets it off more easily. So I'll go with that one. This you can make bases in other ways, but this is the method that I found that gives me a much more stable result. And as I said, just using one sheet of cardboard, you've got a really sturdy base and the top will stay stuck on really well. If you've got your flaps roughly the same size here, when you stick the disc on top, it will stick on nice and securely. So this is just a really neat way of doing it for a very, very low cost. You can buy kind of polystyrene cones and stuff like that, but I tried to not use polystyrene for model making if I can, because it's not a very environmentally friendly material. At least cardboard's a little more easy to kind of decompose and recycle. Okay, so I'm going to try to make this model so that my sun is where it is on this map. So that will mean my disc is about there. So if I flip this upside down, I'm just going to get this in the middle and push it down and get my fingers on all of those little flaps and just push that down. And now we have a galaxy on its base. So to just do some finishing touches to this, like first of all, I want some more dust because galaxies are extremely dusty. And the way that I like to do this is with a dry paintbrush and a little bit of my pastel pencil. I just get one of the blades of my scissors and just scratch a little bit of the pastel or chalk. If you've got some chalk, that'll work. And just scratch it along the edge of where you've stuck down the cotton wool. And then you can go in with a dry brush and just dab on it, and it makes everything look really dusty. Because if you look at any photograph of a galaxy that's been taken, obviously we can't see a photograph of the Milky Way, as I said, but if you look at any galaxy, there are stars all over the place, there's dust all over the place, there are dark bits in between all the arms, and just adding a little bit of chalk dust like this is really good for kind of adding to that. So I'm just scraping it along all of these spiral arms. Sometimes it's nice to just leave it as it lands. You can just get your finger and just press on it, and that will make it look more starry. But if you go in with the brush, like I'm going to do in a second, you will see it much more dusty. So I normally, when I'm doing this, will take quite a long time on this part. And this is how I actually do deep sky sketching, scraping the pastels and then use this dry paintbrush to just dab on it. And it pushes it into the paper and makes everything just look a little bit dustier. And I think that just really adds to the overall feel of it. I think it just looks so much better than just having the isolated cotton wool arms. So you can go back and do that several times until you're happy. If you have some blue chalk, you could do that as well, because quite a lot of the spiral arms on galaxies have got a lot of new stars that are quite blue. And there are also star forming regions that are other colors as well, which we're going to do with glitter glue in a second. But adding some of this gas and dust and starry clusters with the pastel, I just think adds a lovely effect. There's a bit of an empty space there, so I'm just going to go in there and dust a little bit in there. This is why I do this after I've stuck it to the base, because if you put all this pastel dust on and then turn it upside down, some of it might fall off and then you'll smudge it in the wrong place. So you can take your time over that part and add as much or as little as you want. And that, I think, already makes it look more like an actual galaxy rather than a model of one. But the other thing that you will notice if you look at any photograph of a galaxy or looking at this particular model of the galaxy is you get all of these kind of red colored regions. The middle is very yellow and orange. And around the outside, you get these star forming regions that look very kind of red. So I'm using glitter glue. I got a set of 18 glitter glues from the works for £3. So they're just in these little squeezy tubes, so you don't have to glue it and then sprinkle glitter. This is definitely environmentally friendlier because you never ever want to wash glitter down the sink, and this already has the glitter in the glue. So I'm going to use my pale gold and I'm just going to add some glue around the outside here, and when it dries you'll just have that lovely sparkle. You can cover all of this center bit with glitter glue if you want to. You can do it with paint if you want to. Once it's glued down and it's stuck down, it will stay there. So give it a good squeeze to get that out. So this glitter is mixed in with the glue already, but it's quite a wet glue and it takes a long time to dry. So this is why I do this as a final step and then leave the model alone for until the next day, because this glue really takes forever to dry. So we've got the kind of color in the center now. You can probably just see that on camera. We've got gold glitter in the middle. On our map here, there are lots of dots of red. So I'm going to go in with some red and some orange. Actually, no, I'm going to do a bit of blue first because I think a lot of the spiral arms have blue stars in them. So I'm just going to run along a couple of these with some blue glitter. And then I'll go in and add some of the red blobs because I love blue. So if I've ever got an opportunity to do something blue, I will take it because it's my favorite color. So just add some glue. You can put it around the outside of the cotton wool. You can put it on top of the cotton wool. But you're wanting to just give that representation of the fact that there are some blue colored star forming regions on your galaxy. If you're following a photograph of a different galaxy, you can obviously follow the same method. And if that galaxy doesn't have much in the way of blue stars on, you don't have to put any on. But the Milky Way definitely does look like it has some blue stars in it. So just add a bit more there. And then to finish off, I'm going to go in with the red and the orange. And I do try to look where the main kind of coloured bits are and focus my blobs in the sort of the right place. So as I look out on the spiral arms, I can kind of see that there are dots in certain areas. And if you're doing this at home and you've got more time, then you can be really accurate about where you put these blobs and try to get the colors exactly right. These red colors are usually photographed with a special filter that lets you look at a very specific wavelength of light, which is the areas that are star forming regions quite often have that color. It's called hydrogen alpha, and a lot of galaxies have got these lovely kind of orangey red H alpha star forming regions, so you can kind of add those on. And when people ask you why is there orange or red glitter on your galaxy model, you can tell them that that's regions where new stars are forming, and they will think that you are an astronomy genius. So I'm going to go in and add just a couple of red blobs here and there as well. If you have clear glitter glue that's just got the kind of sparkly silver stuff, you can add that as well if you want to. I sometimes use luster dust that I have in my baking kit and put that on there, and that looks really nice. It catches the light really beautifully. So you can take your time and add all of those colors, and that looks awesome. But to finish off, we need to put our sun on there. So a bag of pom-poms here. Our sun is a G-class star, which is very yellow in color. So I'm going to look on my map and see where the sun is on my map. And it was on this little spur. I think I'm the right way up. Yeah. So it's kind of about here somewhere. So I'm going to get a blob of glue, pop that there, and then stick my pom-pom on top. Now, this glitter glue is going to be wet for quite a while, as I said, so be really careful about touching it or squishing it or knocking it over until it's fully dried. But there we have a finished model with lots of glitter on it. You've got lots of gas and dust, you've got your star forming regions, and we even know exactly where the sun is. So there we go. That's the model finished. So as I said, you can take loads more time over it than I just did if you're not on a time pressure. There we go. So see, in this light, you might be able to see the sparkle a bit better. My computer webcam's not very good. There you go. So I hope you found that enjoyable. Any questions from anybody?
Right, chat is open if anybody would like to ask Mary any questions.
I now have a very messy desk.
Yeah. Well, Summer has said, Mary, that is gorgeous. Absolutely is. And I just say to everybody, we have been recording this. I'm going to stop the recording now before the questions in case you want to unmute and show who you are. So I will allow you to start your video if you wish to. That's now set. And you can unmute yourself. And we are stopping the recording.